Welcome to Derm-It, Trotter. Don't swear about skincare, where host Dr. Shannon C. Trotter, a board-certified dermatologist, sits down with fellow dermatologists and skincare experts to separate fact from fiction and simplify skincare. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Derm-It Trotter Don't Swear About Skincare podcast. Today, I have a special guest back on the show, Dr. Katie Varman. She's a board-certified dermatologist and works in private practice at Shine Functional Dermatology in Northern California. Dr. Varman specializes in treating chronic skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema with a blend of conventional and functional medicine practices. She also has a passion for photoimmunology, or basically, again, how does light affect the immune system? How do they intertwine? And she's also owner of Shine Nutraceuticals. Welcome back to the podcast, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me back.
So for those of you that heard our previous podcast, again, you might have been a little shocked to hear that Katie and I were talking more about the benefits. And yes, you heard this, the benefits of sun exposure. Because I think in dermatology, we get a little bit of a bad reputation, and sometimes well-deserved, for really scaring the bejeebers out of you and telling you to stay out of the sun because of all the dangers associated with it. But Katie really highlighted some of those health benefits. So we're going to lead into this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more about diet and maybe supplements, or what we call more nutraceuticals that you can do for sun protection. But first, I'm going to have Katie give a little preview again of kind of those health benefits of sun exposure for those of you that missed the last one.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, last time we had a great discussion about some of the benefits of sunlight exposure, and we talked a little bit more about things, really trying to find that balance between over and underexposure to sunlight, because overexposure, of course, we are all very familiar, skin cancer and aging of the skin being the detrimental effects, but an inadequate sun exposure is also detrimental to people as a whole. And so inadequate sun exposure can be associated with, one, an increased risk of all-cause mortality in general, meaning you just have a higher chance of dying from any reason if you have the lowest amounts of sun exposure.
Scary, yes.
But then also there's an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and type 1 diabetes, inflammatory conditions, things like eczema and IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. There's benefits for mood, metabolism, the microbiome we talked about also. So a whole host of things that a moderate and an appropriate amount of sunlight can help for as far as a human being as a whole. And so we were talking about how do we help bridge that gap so that we can educate people how to get enough for wellness, but not so much that you're putting yourself at unnecessary risk of skin cancer and aging.
So that's the good news. You guys can go out and get some sun, although you'll have to go back to that podcast, listen to some specific recommendations, because as Katie mentioned, it is balance that we're trying to achieve there. And part of the balance I think people are looking for sun protection is really kind of looking at our diet and then also supplements. I think supplements have really caught on. People are looking for natural alternatives to maximize health. So I wanted to talk about, before even the supplements, and because the diet's kind of, tagged into that with some of the ingredients in our diet that are very important for sun protection practices. Let's talk more about the diet piece. Like, what do you recommend from a diet perspective that might actually be sun protective for a patient?
There are a couple different classes of foods that are very, very helpful, but I wanted to take a step back and talk about why each of those classes are going to be helpful, because when you look at the timeline, kind of the pathogenesis, that pathway from sunlight to skin cancer, from sunlight to photoaging of the skin, there's multiple different steps where we can intervene, whether it's with diet or nutraceutical or whatnot. There's multiple different steps along that pathway, and that's really how we derive these main classes of dietary interventions to help. And so it is kind of important to know what those steps are, because otherwise it's just kind of a mess of like, it's like, okay, eat healthy, I get it. But it really is much more specific than that. So just to give like the 1-minute overview, when you're exposed to UV light, there's that whole cascade. So there's oxidative stress that occurs that damages DNA both directly and indirectly. They're more directly from light specifically. There's inflammatory pathways that are activated, and all of that inflammation is what you see on the skin as sunburn and redness. There is immunosuppression that occurs in the skin after sunlight exposure, and that immunosuppression is a really, really, really important determinant of whether you're going to go on and get skin cancer or not, because we know people who are immunosuppressed in general have a really high risk of developing skin cancer compared to people who aren't immunosuppressed. So that plays a really important role as well. And so when you're kind of looking at all these different layers, we can treat with, we want to treat that oxidative stress. So all those little free radicals floating around causing damage to structures in DNA. We want to address inflammatory pathways, because when things are inflamed, it creates what we call a pro-growth, a pro-tumor environment, and activates tumor progression. We also want to make sure that we're addressing DNA damage as much as possible and preventing that immunosuppression that occurs from sunlight. And so the reason for all these dietary interventions is because we want to target all of those steps and kind of plug all the holes. So just to kind of name the top ones, we can talk more about carotenoids, really important. Antioxidants, and those kind of go with like it's anti-inflammatory as well, because it's a lot of the polyphenols. Omega-3s, hugely important. And then isoflav, the like phytoestrogens, so people think of soy, can actually play an important role also. But the big ones are going to be the omegas, the antioxidants, the anti-inflammatory, and the carotenoids.
Wow. And so when you think of like some of those groups then diet-wise, are there particular, like more specific like foods you would say, hey, grab a bunch of blueberries, or, what would you recommend just to be more practical if somebody's like, what should I really add in? Not that you might get the full value, because obviously you're looking at a variety of those things, but what things tangibly would you recommend somebody pick up at the grocery store to accomplish some of those dietary needs?
The easiest way, if you just want to take kind of the overview, would be colorful foods. So color is an indication of polyphenol content, and what's neat about foods is they're rich in all sorts of different polyphenols. And so if you're getting the rainbow in your grocery cart, your blues and your reds and your yellows and oranges, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to be getting a lot of these beautiful polyphenols and carotenoids as well. The big hitters for carotenoids that are kind of in everybody's diet are going to be carrots and tomatoes. Those are the easiest ones to get. And it's not like you have to eat 100 carrots a day. We're talking like 2 carrots and
My
like,
God, I hate carrots. I got to be honest with you.
well, it doesn't have to be carrots, but something orange, right? And you could get your carotenoids.
I'm just teasing.
I think I literally turn orange like every summer because I eat so many tomatoes and carrots. I love summer foods, but it's kind of fun when you think about the design of everything. It's such that, right, in the summertime, when you need support is when all of these beautiful fruits and vegetables are available for your body. So it's like the plants need it, and then you eat the plants, and then you need it. And so, so there's plenty of ways to get color, whether you're talking about bell peppers, and there's lots of options for orange too, but carrots are kind of the easiest one that people can get down. And tomatoes, there's a study like the lycopene specifically in tomatoes. There's a study that looked at 16 grams of lycopene daily dosing for, I think it was about 10 weeks or so, which is the equivalent to like 1.5 tablespoons of tomato paste. So it's not like an insane amount. Resulted in a 40% reduction in what we call the minimal erythemal dose. So how much UV light it takes to burn your skin is really dramatically reduced by like really not a whole lot of tomato paste. And so these kind of levels that we see in studies that visibly very clearly increase your skin's tolerance to sunlight, specifically ultraviolet light, are not exorbitant amounts. Like you're not having to take supplements and blends and things like that in order to get it. If you're having, a tomato and like a carrot and maybe a cup of spinach, you're getting a ton of lutein, lycopene, and beta carotene, enough for like your day's amount. So I tell people, as long as you're eating, like check the list, like did I eat something colorful today? And then when it comes to polyphenols, we're thinking more about, like you're saying, blueberries. The berries are really rich in polyphenols. Pomegranate is a very popular one that's very, very rich in several different amazing polyphenols. So doing a fruit and a vegetable that are colorful I mean, that's really a great goal for the day. And then you got to get your omega-3s for the day, which most people are aware of, fatty fish, the salmon and whatnot, but you do flax and walnuts, and you just Google search high omega foods. And you just look at the list. You're like, did I eat one of those things today? Done. And if you didn't, then there's supplements. And if you're high risk, then there's supplements. But in general, did you eat something colorful? Did you eat an omega-3? That's kind of the easy answer for a daily goal.
No, I love that because I mean, I'm not a big fan of fad diets and telling people to do this extreme or that extreme. And I do think it gets overwhelming for patients because, like, gosh, I got to remember to eat this or how much, or, I don't have time, or, I don't care for that particular vegetable or fruit. But I think that makes it more realistic. And I tend to fall back on too when people are asking for, particular, diet. Again, I'm not a fan of a diet, but I usually tell you, eating Mediterranean diet or lifestyle really, does hit some of these major food groups and things that we do need, I think, for overall general health. But it's amazing from the sun protection piece, like that some of the things are included in that diet, the omega-3s, the fish diets, that high in those Mediterranean diets that are high in fish and, vegetables and fruits. I mean, it's amazing how you kind of can capture both. So I always tell people, when in doubt, I think you're safe to go that route. But really, again, it's about balance to achieve that. So,
Yeah.
beyond kind of the food aspect of it, if they jump away and say, I'm just not going to do it. I don't have time. I buy vegetables, they're bad in a day, so I don't even buy them. What if
Yeah.
they're looking to do this more from the nutraceutical side, or maybe what most people might think of as more like supplements? And if you feel like there's a distinction there between true nutraceuticals and supplements, feel free to kind of comment on that too, because I think people use it often interchangeably. And what types of things should people look for in those categories as well?
And that's how I like the word supplement, I think is correct, right? It's really to supplement your diet. And so that's how I kind of describe it to people, right? I'm like, look at what you ate that day. And, for a low risk person, right? We're talking about somebody who hasn't had a ton of sunburns. They're not immunosuppressed. They don't have, very, very fair skin that freckles easily, and they live in California. For somebody who's not low risk, the idea is like, try to eat it, because that's good for you anyways, right? Because it's not just good for your skin, it's good for your vascular system and your entire body. But if it's really something that's hard for them, like, do your best to eat those foods. But if not, that's when you put a supplement in, and you can do it from day to day. How did you eat that week? Do you need to add a little extra supplement? And that's an okay way to do it too for low risk people. And so the goal with omegas, I'm a huge fan of omegas. I usually use 2 grams of omega-3 fatty acids a day. It's not the easiest to get. You end up taking some pretty hardy pills, but the omega-3 fatty acids are, I mean, undoubtedly photoprotective, right? There is zero doubt. The literature is robust. I mean, and yes, a lot of it is animal models, because there's just not, as robust information in humans. But there's, when we're talking about minimal erythemal dose, it's a really, really nice way, and that's an easy way to test and see, is a supplement photoprotective? And there's studies using 3 grams of omega-3s daily, which will increase that minimal erythemal dose by 50%. So even just an omega by itself can have a profound impact. And that's because they are so anti-inflammatory. When your cells are made up with omega-3s as opposed to omega-6s. And then you put in some beautiful carotenoids in there too, because if you look at the structure of a carotenoid, it's this long, lovely structure, and it just wedges itself right in that cell membrane. When those cells are stressed, whether it's, whatever kind of stressor, whether you're talking about pollution, which we know contributes to skin cancer, whether you're talking about sunlight or whatnot, when those cells are under stress, they create much less inflammation than a cell that's made up of omega-3s and devoid of like carotenoids and other antioxidants and things like that. And so just that anti-inflammatory aspect of it is protectant from the development of skin cancer and skin aging. And so I love the omegas, and that's an easy thing to supplement. They're everywhere. You obviously want a very reputable brand, so you're not getting nasty, rancid oil. But omega-3s, right? If you didn't eat 3 servings of fish, if you're not getting flax or walnut and all these other kind of precursors for omega-3s, if you're not getting it in your diet, supplement. Easy. Same with carotenoids. If you hate carrots and you hate things that are red and orange, like you can take a beautiful mixed carotenoid supplement. And the nice thing about carotenoids is you don't really have to worry about vitamin A as far as like overdoing it, because you can very much overdo it with vitamin A, but carotenoids don't really have an upper limit. There is some safety concern with really high doses of beta carotene in patients who smoke, but these are very high levels. And so in general, you really have a hard time overdoing it with carotenoids. And so a nice mixed carotenoid supplement with lutein, lycopene, and yeah, I love astaxanthin is one that's showing up in the literature a ton, but you can get nice blends and you can just supplement it if you need to. And then same thing goes for antioxidants, and we'll touch about niacinamide in a minute too, but from a dietary supplement, the carotenoids, the omegas, and the antioxidants, you could do shots of, there's beautiful blends like powders for polyphenols and stuff you can get now. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned niacinamide or nicotinamide that we definitely want to touch on, and some of the other things that I know that have been out there in the literature, or maybe people have heard of, like pine bark, green tea. I mean, how many people have a cup of green tea every day or love green tea shampoo or some other health benefit they use it for? But what are some of the other nutraceuticals that you would want to highlight that you think people need to have on their radar that might be sun protective as well?
Yes. So for people who are moderate or high risk, or you're just outside in the sun all the time because you're an athlete and need to complement your sunscreen or whatnot, there are things that you wouldn't naturally find maybe in your diet, like Polypodium leucotomos is a fern. It's probably not finding its way into your diet. And higher doses of niacinamide or nicotinamide, are also not finding their way into your diet, but are very, very photoprotective. And so if you consider yourself, if you're high risk just because of tons of exposure, or if you're high risk because immunosuppression or other skin cancers and whatnot, that's when those kind of supplements can be very helpful. A lot of dermatologists are aware of niacinamide based on on-track trials from a few years ago, which demonstrated, a modest but statistically significant decrease in skin cancer and pre-cancers in high-risk people over the course of a year. And niacinamide is one of my favorite tools because of the mechanism of how it works. It is unique from all the other things that we talked about. So omega-3s being anti-inflammatory, carotenoids absorbing light, especially blue light, right? Something sunscreen doesn't do very well.
Right.
Lutein actually, it specifically absorbs blue light. So it works really well for your eyes and your skin, but the carotenoids absorb stuff, and then you have your antioxidants. But niacinamide is very unique in its mechanism. So when your skin is exposed to sunlight, it has somewhat of an energy crisis, meaning the mitochondria can kind of go a little bit into shock momentarily. And that lapse in energy that's being produced prevents DNA from being repaired very well. And that downstream leads to immunosuppression in the skin. And what niacinamide does as a cofactor for energy production is it prevents that crisis from happening, and promoting DNA repair and preventing immunosuppression. So that little cascade of events, it's very, very clear, both topically and orally in humans and in animals, that you do not get that degree of immunosuppression in the skin when you have niacinamide on board, or nicotinamide is the other name for it. You'll also see studies with from like the biohackers, longevity people with like NR and NMN, and they're also down the road and maybe even more effective. But right now the studies in dermatology anyways are with niacinamide. So that's, that's usually what I'll recommend. But it is higher doses when you're talking about high risk patients. So a lot of the studies do either 500 or 500 twice a day milligrams. And it's probably a little bit less effective for people who are immunosuppressed, because the mechanism of action is that it supports the immune system. And so if they don't have an immune system to begin with, it's going to be a little bit less effective. So that's why some of the studies are mixed, is because some are in immunosuppressed populations and some are not. But it is a really, really, really amazing tool because it is unique. And immunosuppression plays a very big role in development of skin cancer. And I've had excellent results when we do these blends with my patients.
Any other, in like the last couple minutes we have, supplement-wise, dietary recommendations you would make for somebody who's trying to maximize their sun protection, but really looking for, kind of that natural alternative, just simply what we eat and what we can actually get, maybe at the vitamin store or the grocery store that might be able to help us a little bit more?
The one thing we didn't mention, the last thing I would add to the ones that we talked about was the polypodium leukotomos. And polypodium leukotomos is a fern. It's been used and studied extensively for its photoprotective roles, and it has all sorts of mechanisms of how it works. Being an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, supports DNA repair, but it's really, really effective. Like the other things, like all of the things I've mentioned, we have human studies in humans that demonstrate it increases how much light it takes to burn the skin. But then there's other benefits with, preventing DNA damage with things like green tea extract you mentioned, and pine bark extract, and all of these others that can also support, different parts of that pathway. So me personally, I like to blend thing, and instead of doing megadoses of one thing, we support in all these different ways. And it's personalized, which means some person might need omegas and somebody else might not need omegas because they eat fish, 3 or 4 times a week.
Right.
So it's personalized, and it's also personalized to the person sitting in front of you as far as how much sun they get and how much support that they need. Because somebody who has, type 6, very, very, somebody's very dark skinned, they, need more sunlight. And so you could protect with all these beautiful antioxidants and things like that, but actually encourage more sunlight versus somebody who's very fair skinned. You're going to, be like, okay, you need more sunscreen. We need to protect, and we're going to pull out all the tools. So it's very much a personalized approach that I like to take.
And I think that's the goal for each patient, that when they come in, we just do an information overload. I know with all the great tips you just shared, it can be overwhelming. I think, circling back to their dermatologist, their family doctor, if they're talking about supplements, and really devising a plan that just meets their needs. Really good point to sort of end on here. So you can kind of show us we can sort of eat and supplement our way back to skin protection from the sun, or sun protection, I should say. So that's fantastic. But thank you again for just kind of highlighting, other ways we can protect ourselves, because I think we all get pigeonholed with just sunscreen and sun protective clothing and common sense measures about when we do things, but we forget about some of the basics, which is our diet, and then ways we can maximize supplements. So thank you for coming on and highlighting those on the podcast today. For our listeners, Katie, if they want to find you, where can they find you out there on the web?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. I'm not very active on social media. On Instagram, our clinic here is shine_dermatology, and our website is shinefunctionalmed.com, where we do try to stay active. So those would be the best places at this time.
Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and stay tuned for the next episode of Trotter. Don't swear about skincare.
Thanks for listening to Derm-It Trotter. For more about skincare, visit dermittrotter.com. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with anyone who needs a little skincare sanity. Until next time, stay skin smart.